China's in the middle of a car manufacturing boom, or you might rather call it a car manufacturing bubble. There's nothing that compares to this historically as far as the number of cars that China is producing and the scale and the acceleration in production. The world's never seen anything like this. The only kind of paling comparison you could make would be the United States in the early 20th century when there were dozens of car brands, and over the 1920s, 1930s, most of them got washed out and bought up by larger players in the space. And that's exactly what we're going to see happening in China. Right now, there are about 150 car brands in China. There's possibly 240 manufacturers in China, car manufacturers in China. Last year in 2024, China produced about 31 million cars and they exported about 5 million. Now, in 2025, we're on track to increase that level. In March, the increase was about 11% year over year from March of 2024. Now, to compare that to the United States only produced about 10 million cars last year, and with Canada only produced about 11 million cars. So one of the reasons why China is producing so many cars, and these are actually more cars than the world can absorb, and this is due to China's industrial policy. The government of China, the CCP of China's industrial policy. So you might be wondering, why is China producing so many cars? Why are they overproducing cars? And the answer to that is very simple. And that is because the Chinese government is subsidizing its biggest and favorite car manufacturers. It's also subsidizing not just car manufacturers, but many industrial manufacturers. And when it comes to EVs, electric vehicles, BYD is now the largest electric vehicle manufacturer in the world. They've surpassed Tesla. They get subsidies from the Chinese government, but so does CATL. They are the largest battery manufacturer in the world, and they manufacture most of the batteries for EVs coming out of China. Now, this presents a big problem to most of the world in the fact that there are all these cars to absorb. Now, you might say, why is that a problem? Why would that be a problem? These cars are getting cheaper. Chinese cars are getting cheaper. In fact, the BYD Seagull is under $10,000. And for consumers, that is a really great deal. The problem comes, though, when these prices won't last, and they won't last. Companies like BYD have been cutting their prices all year, and that's how they can sell these cars for such a low price. There have also been a number of scandals in China when it comes to these car manufacturers and how they are essentially financing their companies through their supply chain by having very long payment terms with their suppliers. Now, this is something that was cracked down on in March in China. I don't know whether it's still going on or not, but the Chinese auto manufacturers were essentially financing themselves through their supply chain by taking very long lead times or very long times to pay their suppliers. In addition to that, you have the executives and chairmen and CEOs of the Chinese automotive companies sniping at one another, talking about and they're doing this publicly in the Chinese social media, talking about how the the Chinese automotive industry, is unhealthy. This is I'm especially referring to the chairman of Great Wall Motor Company, and he was referring to another player in the industry, which is suspected to be BYD, as being reminiscent of Evergrande. Now, Evergrande was the Chinese real estate developer that blew up. It was a massive real estate development company that essentially blew up. So China is overproducing. The car companies of China are overproducing all of these cars. In fact, there were a couple of reports from last year. These are from Chinese research companies. One of the companies said that China's automotive factory utilization was only 49%. And when you're running your factory at 49%, it becomes very efficient and the costs kind of get out of control. Now, there was an earlier report that stated that the factory utilization was somewhere between 64 and 70 to 74%, depending on the month of 2024. Now, chances are the factory utilization, well, I don't know whether it would have gone up or down in 2025, but those 2024 numbers were not healthy numbers as far as being able to produce your vehicles efficiently. However, the Chinese automotive companies, especially the EV companies, have been slashing their prices. And because there's so much sniping going back and forth between executives publicly in China, it's assumed that a lot of these companies are losing a lot of money on the cars that they're manufacturing. But they've been subsidized by the government previously, and that has helped them finance things, as well as what I stated with the payment terms previously from their suppliers. So they've had a lot of money come into the space, a lot of money come into the Chinese automotive industry, and now things are becoming desperate. So you might ask, what's so bad about this for the rest of the world? I mean, after all, if the Chinese government is subsidizing their car industry and the rest of the world gets cheap cars, hey, the Chinese government is paying for our cars. Well, if you live in a country, or if you are a country that doesn't have an automobile industry, that's fine. You can get discount cars, you can get a decent car at a very good price because the Chinese government is subsidizing it for you. However, if you're in a country that does have a car industry, or a continent such as Europe, the United States has 100% tariffs on Chinese vehicles, and I don't, even without the tariffs, I don't believe they would be allowed to be sold here for the most part anyway. Canada has tariffs. The European Union has tariffs. The US tariffs are 100%. I believe the European Union tariffs are 35%, something like that. Then you have other countries such as Korea and Japan. I'm not sure what their tariff situation is, but their auto industries have been eaten alive by the Chinese automotive industry. And that goes for internal combustion engine cars as well as electric cars. They're doing the same thing in Germany to companies like Volkswagen. Volkswagen's really suffering and having to lay off employees now because their market share has been shrinking incredibly. And the same goes for companies like Nissan in Japan. The company is being hollowed out, and this is mostly due to competitive pressure from Chinese auto manufacturers. So China's now trying to dump these cars in the economic sense to anywhere it can sell them, essentially. And one of the big markets where they're trying to dump them now is Brazil. And Brazil only has 10% tariffs on cars. Now, their tariffs are supposed to incrementally go up to about 35% or so in 2027, I believe, but that's fairly slow. Now, I know Brazil does manufacture some cars, but with that 10%, uh, the Chinese companies are able to really move a lot of vehicles into Brazil, and the prices are very competitive. I believe last month BYD sold 22,000 or shipped 22,000 vehicles into Brazil. So they're massively dumping their vehicles into Brazil. And that was something like a 40% increase over the previous year, or something like that, something to that effect. So, anyway, the Chinese companies are dumping these vehicles around the world. And as I say, if you're not a manufacturer, if you're not a country with an industry, an auto industry that manufactures cars, you'll be fine because you only have the consumer end to deal with. However, if you are a country with an automotive industry and you're not protected by tariffs or some other barriers, this will destroy your car industry, your automotive industry, and it'll do it in 1 year. And then next year, there's going to be a major wipeout of Chinese car brands. It happens the same way every time. This is what happened in the early 20th century in the United States. It happened in the early 20th century in Europe. You can look back to the 19th century. The same thing happened with railroads. These industries form bubbles, and that's exactly what the Chinese automotive industry is in right now. Is it's in this bubble, and when this bubble collapses, there is going to be a lot of collateral damage, and most of these companies in China will fail, will be essentially run out of business. Now, this will also happen to auto manufacturers from other countries: Korea, Japan, Europe, the United States. Wherever cars are made and they're being affected by competition from China, their business will be essentially swallowed up and destroyed by this flood of cheap cars from China. But this flood of cheap cars is only going to last maybe this year and next year at the latest. After that, it's going to collapse because all this production is going to come to a halt. In fact, just this month, 6 municipalities or cities in China are eliminating their incentives for car buyers. So the subsidies that were previously given out for, I think they're primarily for electric vehicles, those are being eliminated in 6 large metro regions. So those are subsidies that are going away. So you can see the money is slowly starting to be taken away from the Chinese car manufacturers. And when it's all over, there's going to be a lot of dead companies. And if you are an international car manufacturer and you're not protected, your business could be essentially destroyed, or the entire automotive industry could be destroyed. Now, actually, I don't believe that Europe has strong enough barriers against the Chinese cars. BYD is going to be manufacturing cars or assembling them in Europe and selling them in Europe. They're taking major share. That's going to hurt the European auto manufacturers in other countries, in Germany and so on. I believe they're making them in Hungary and in Turkey. So those are not really the core essential countries when it comes to what the European Union thinks of its industrial areas. So this is the Chinese automotive bubble. It's at peak now, or we've already passed peak. Don't really know, but it's not going to last much longer because these companies aren't making money any longer. Their subsidies are being taken away from them, and the Chinese government is probably not going to subsidize so much of the manufacture of this. The Chinese government themselves have said they expect there to be a lot fewer automotive manufacturers in China. So it seems like something they're planning for. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for listening. And if you enjoy this kind of content, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe, and I'll be making more videos on these types of topics in the future. Thank you.